Hi, Julia. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I've been a big fan for a while, so this
I'm
is
excited
definitely an
to
honor.
I'm excited to hear your story. You're one of those multi-hyphenate type folks who seems to always be doing something and doing something a little bit different day to day. So I'm interested to kind of hear how your journey and story is impacted by all of the creativity that you kind of infuse in your life.
Yeah, I'm kind of someone who's always had my hand in, multiple buckets while balancing multiple buckets. And it's really hard for me to just kind of be like, have one title or one kind of, yeah, one description. I like to kind of explore the multifaceted things that come into my life, whether it's kind of by happenstance or something that I'm looking for.
How long have you been in the hospitality industry?
So I've been in restaurants since I was 17. I started as I think my official title was counter girl at a, kind of a divey pizzeria place. But I'd say like my true kind of calling to hospitality was when I just turned 21. I started working in this really small Neapolitan pizzeria. It was really cool. It was kind of elevated casual service, 25 seats, really cool, really expensive Italian wine, Neapolitan style. And that kind of got me into restaurants and what it was like to connect with people, not just, as a counter person, not that that's bad in any way, but it definitely got me my feet wet serving. And then I started managing when I was 21. So I'm 33 now, so I've been managing for 12 years, which is kind of crazy to say.
What do you like about the industry?
I definitely like meeting people. Growing up, I was definitely kind of a shy kid, socially awkward. And so I originally got a job in restaurants to kind of, learn how to talk to people. And it opened the door to just kind of all the different people you meet in the industry, kind of that, they're all so different, but we all kind of crave that kind of chaotic environment. And I've met probably some of the closest people who I still talk to today through that.
How did you deal with the chaos of restaurants?
I work really well in chaotic environments. I'm kind of, I don't, I do really well with kind of routine within the chaos, if that makes sense. You always have your to-do list, especially like, when you're serving or behind the bar or managing, kind of puts me in the zone. So, if something's calm, I tend to get that like, it's kind of like right before it gets busy and everyone's kind of like, oh, it's going to be an easy day. It gets, and so I like to find solutions in the chaos, I think is what kind of drives me to it.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I was, like, on the cusp of the weeds, I was always, like, think of a bastardized version of the Rudyard Kipling quote of, "If you can keep your head when those about you are losing theirs and blaming you, you'll be a man,
Yeah.
son."
And that's definitely how I feel. You kind of, especially if you have people kind of who like that, in the weeds, kind of, for lack of a better term, balls to the wall. You're all kind of just standing there like, okay, when's it going to hit? When's it going to hit? I think that's kind of the addictive quality. It's like, it's going to be, so busy, but I've always done really well with volume. I like a busy, chaotic environment.
What's your relationship with alcohol been like through your time in hospitality?
Mine is, I think, you know, unique to me, but still very much, you can kind of find it within the industry. I was introduced to, right when I turned 21, like I said, I started working in this really nice, pizzeria, and it was really nice Italian wines, some French wines. And so, there I was at like 21 learning about these really cool wines. And I always loved the kind of mysticism behind wine and, going into craft cocktails a little bit later. And I loved the component that added to meals and connecting with people. But I would say that, a couple years in, once I started managing and kind of being fully immersed in the world of, the industry, it kind of developed into an unhealthy pattern. I wasn't someone who was like blackout drunk all the time, but it definitely escalated to, going out with people after work or a shift drink, and then kind of became integrated into my daily life. Whether it was one drink or 5 bottles of wine, it was always definitely prevalent.
Yeah, I think there's something to that as well with, the chaos that comes with restaurant industry. We are meant to deal with the chaos and the stress that comes on like rather quickly, kind of like faster than any other stressor in our life. And then as a way out of it, like alcohol is a really easy way to kind of just like seemingly calm that for the time. And you don't really realize that it becomes a pattern until something kind of like wakes you up to it. Did you have a moment that kind of like woke you up to maybe this is an unhealthy pattern or lifestyle track that I'm on?
I think I had multiple moments kind of slapping me in the face for multiple years. And it kind of took me until I was ready to kind of confront that. I always used, I've always been able to talk to people pretty naturally, but, kind of winding down after a shift or feeling just, even giving myself social anxiety by thinking about it too much. I always found like, oh, I'll have a glass of wine or I'll go out with people and, even just like physically having that drink in my hand definitely kind of, flipped off that anxiety. And I think kind of over the years of just like, reflecting now of just like there were people who kind of noticed these things and kind of alluded to it or I've never had anyone, flat out, try to intervention me or anything, but just concerned people who are like, hey, you might be drinking a little too much. And I just definitely wasn't ready to hear it until I was ready to stop drinking.
Yeah, what were you thinking in those times? Because it's definitely something I can relate to. It's like, I'm more powerful than this, so I don't need to hear that from you. Was that something similar?
Yeah, and it was always kind of like, well, I don't have a problem because I wasn't a stereotypical, I never hid vodka under the sink or, I never considered myself an alcoholic. I was just like, yeah, like, I might drink a little too much here and there. I'm in my early 20s. I deserve to, go out with friends, but I could never kind of, not that I couldn't handle the alcohol, but I would always, wake up kind of feeling guilty or feeling like this isn't how I want to feel. And once I kind of started feeling like that, instead of, ignoring those things by drinking more, it was like once I started having some self-reflection, I definitely noticed, this is a problem that I have, not it's a problem that I need to deal with and kind of reflect on how I was handling things or not handling things.
How long ago was that?
So I'll be sober for 4 years in November, so November of 2021.
Congrats, by the way.
Thank you. I'd say it's probably one of the biggest things I'm most proud of.
Yeah. Yeah, it opens you up to a lot more. It seems like it's just one thing, but every time I look back on my own sobriety, I'm like, well, that one thing really did make way for all these countless other things that followed in a good way.
Yeah, and you started out as just I'm gonna take time off, right? Yeah, that's kind of how I was. I had tried getting sober at 27, was in this very, I'm sure we've all been in a very tumultuous relationship with someone else in the industry, and it was just we kind of fed into each other's drinking, and so I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna stop drinking, and I could not do it. I could go one day, and then I just could not do it. Whether it was what was that?
What got in the way?
Definitely my atmosphere. I think, I was managing in and around alcohol, friends, and just myself of just like, well, I'll just have one drink. It's not that big of an issue. And I think I was seeing it long term versus, just take it day by day.
Can you take me back to those early days of how your mindset sort of shifted? Like once you kind of like came to terms with this is something that I want to change, like how did you hold yourself to it?
So I think I started seeing people around me who, I had been going out with, and it was always just like, let's grab a drink after work. And then that would turn until, 2 or 3 in the morning. But once I started seeing people around me who I had been going out with who were kind of personally looking at their own relationships with alcohol is kind of when I was like, oh, maybe this is something I should pursue. And it was always kind of there in my mind of just like, this is an issue that I have and, that I need to deal with, whatever I'm kind of using alcohol to cover up. And it was a weird kind of tightrope of which side I'm going to teeter on. Cause, an hour before I might be like, yeah, I'm going to go out with friends and drink water. And then, the next morning I'm waking up and I was like, I don't know how I got home.
What did you start doing to kind of like make it stick?
So when I actually decided to stop drinking, I kind of saw sobriety as like a huge kind of label of just like it's this daunting life thing. And when I finally stopped drinking, I was working at this restaurant where it was around a bunch of people who had stopped drinking, and it was in a really like a very healthy work environment, probably the healthiest I've worked in. And I like was able to look at myself and be like, okay, I think I can actually stop. And I kind of had like a, not a last hurrah, but that final night where I was like, I'm good. I think I'm good. So the next day I was just like, okay, I'm just going to wake up and not drink today. And it stuck for 4 years. And I think looking at it as, just point A versus point A to point B definitely helps.
Yeah, that's really big. That's kind of something I talk about a lot because I was making it really difficult for myself when I was looking too far ahead because you don't know what's coming and you don't know what's coming in the best way possible. I could have never imagined the life that I have now when I was making that decision back then. And it was like, I was making those excuses. I was like, yeah, I won't drink, but, Christmas will come up or my birthday will come up. And then slowly when those things like passed and I wasn't drinking, like that's when I started noticing the shifts when I was able to say no and the times when like absolutely felt like I had to say yes. But it was hard to think that way because I didn't want to make excuses or make plans for a version of myself that didn't exist yet. And I didn't know that was possible back then. So it was a little bit more difficult because I was certainly eyeing point B more than I was dealing with point A.
Yeah, so I stopped drinking around, it was either the day before or the day after Thanksgiving. And I remember I was very much the same of like, Christmas is coming up, New Year's, there's always something on the horizon. And I think like, yeah, I was just like, oh, I'm going to be missing out. I'm going to, everyone's going to judge me. But then once I finally was just like, just try it, I think that was kind of the mentality. Instead of being like, oh my gosh, what are people going to think of me or whatnot? It was kind of like, well, what do I want to do? And, how am I going to, kind of honor kind of what I've been telling myself for, X amount of years. And I think that's also been helpful of kind of shifting it from people looking in to kind of looking out too.
How did it change work for you? Was it something that you felt like, did you ever feel like you'd have to leave the industry or what was your mindset in staying?
So the first time around when I was 27 thinking I'm going to stop drinking. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to drop the industry and I'm going to have to drop everything and try and find a new career or new path or whatnot. I think that also scared me and was maybe one of the reasons why I didn't stop drinking then. When I did stop drinking, I was actually met with like a lot of warmth kind of from people who I decided to tell. And a lot of those people were in the industry of just like, or sharing their stories of, oh, this is why I don't drink, or, I found that it was actually like a huge connector to me, whether it's like, with coworkers or even guests. It definitely kind of encouraged me to stay within the industry and kind of explore what it was like being, kind of the anomaly or the lesser of the group who just chooses not to drink. And it's actually been really cool to see how I've developed as a manager. Like I've noticed that I've been able to handle situations better, and be fully alert and fully in the moment, which is still something that I'm still learning. Like that, I'm still fully present in every moment versus looking for, I can't wait to clock out so I can have that glass of wine after my shift.
Yeah, how did you view the things that you had to tackle once you removed alcohol? Because I felt like, I would drink in anticipation of bad things and not necessarily as a result of bad things. So in doing that, it always made things much bigger than they actually were. It wasn't until I removed alcohol where, the things that I like actually had to face, I was like, this is what I was afraid of. Like, did you notice that in, small leadership tasks at work and some of the other things that maybe you were kind of putting on the back burner of not wanting to avoid when you were drinking?
Yeah, I'm still I'm still learning, so when I first stopped drinking, I kind of swung one way of like being very cautious because I wasn't sure how I would respond to things, because I was very much like you of just I'm going to drink in anticipation of having a really, shitty shift or, this drama that could be happening. But so I was pretty precautious. And so I feel like I kind of was like, kind of had a wall up for a while. And, I was forced to sit with myself as like a person and as, in this job where I'm constantly surrounded by things that can kind of, shift very quickly. And I learned that I actually like responded very well, and people really liked who I was or responded really well to who I was sober versus, having a drink and then like anticipating all this stuff like you were saying. And I'm still kind of learning like, the pendulum swinging back of just learning how I respond naturally to things versus, being under the influence of something.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
referenced, sitting with yourself. What happens when you do that?
It still is, I should say, preface with it's still hard. I think it's hard for anyone to sit with themselves, but um, I think when I stopped drinking, I had to, you have all this time that you spent going out with others or, filling with, with drinks. And I just basically had to learn how to, sit with myself and my thoughts and kind of get introduced to who I was as a person without this thing that kind of ruled my life. And it's been really cool, kind of like who I thought I would necessarily be isn't who I am, and that's not bad, kind of referencing like you were saying, I couldn't imagine like what would come from, stopping drinking
Yeah. What else filled the time?
in terms of,
Well, you said that, like, you spend a lot of time when you're drinking, like, going out
yeah.
places and doing things, like, what filled that space? Like, where did going different places, doing different things?
Yeah, I think you know, kind of like you said, I've always kind of had my hands in different buckets, and I've always been a very creative person. And once I was able to, free up this time or give myself time back that wasn't, being wasted, I was able to kind of reintroduce myself with my creativity and really kind of hone that in and spend a lot of time alone, being the industry. I've always been very introverted. I like being around people, in my job, but being able to kind of embrace that introvertedness and do stuff alone. Whereas, I might beforehand be like, oh, I can't do that alone because I have to do it with friends, has been kind of cool. So exploring that kind of relationship with myself has been really neat.
What, revealed itself to you in kind of, like, your creative space? Like, were there, ideas and stuff like that hidden in there?
I've always, so kind of like in tandem with working in the industry, I've always done graphic design, social media, a little bit of everything. But um, I've always really loved photography, but never saw myself as someone who was like, I've always taken photos, done photography, but I've always said like that's kind of where like, oh, I lack creativity because, I can't be another photographer on Instagram or, taking pictures of cocktails and stuff. And once I was able to kind of like re-examine that, I was like, you know what, I'm actually am like, this is another facet of creativity that I can fully like say that I'm good at and kind of, you know, surround myself with.
Yeah. Do you feel that with, like, your graphic design as well, as, like, the more time available has made you appreciate what you're capable of more?
Definitely, I see it more as like, a fun thing that I get to do versus something that I have to do. I've always had, I've done freelance graphic design and social media, and it's always kind of been like hand in hand with industry, but now it's like I get to choose what I want to do and integrate it into my job as, in the industry and hospitality versus kind of things that they always kind of competed with each other. And I always kind of went into the industry because it was easier to go that route versus, being like, I can be creative in that role and be a creative person.
How did, how did leadership change for you?
Um, I'm still working on that for sure. I've always been a very direct person to communicate with. I always am very pro employee, like in terms of leading, you know, making sure that it's a place like I want to create an atmosphere with staff and they want to come in and work service, even if it's the worst, shittiest service of all. Like it's in a place where they want to come, and I feel like that's developed really well once I've stopped drinking and was able to actually fully kind of be a leader. I think I've learned how to be even more empathetic with people, even people struggling, whether it's with their own addictions or outside of that. I think I've just been able to develop more as a human and see someone's having a bad day and see them in that humanity versus being like, wow, they're a shitty worker or they have a bad attitude. It's like, it's a full encompassing thing. And I think that kind of gives me I really hate saying it, but it kind of, well, it's humbled me for sure.
Did it create any rules within the restaurant for you as far as like staff engagement with alcohol or anything like that?
Yeah, when I've had held a general manager title for quite a few years now, especially after stopping drinking. My line is to always like, I always find like, the time when you go out with the team after work, like that's sacred. You can kind of bitch about guests, how bad the service was, but as a manager, that's for the staff, that's not for me. So my own personal boundary I draw is, regardless of how close I am to people on staff, is, to maintain that professional boundary. And I think that's helped me kind of ease into that manager role too of not drinking because, people can go out and they know that I'm not going to go there too, but it's kind of a protected space for them too.
Do you have any thoughts on non-alcoholic cocktails and availability on menus and stuff like that?
That's something I'm super passionate about. I'm not the biggest fan of the word mocktail. I think that kind of the connotation was set, 10 years ago. It was kind of mocking, but I think that the whole non-alcoholic zero proof movement is really cool now. Even trying to stop drinking, 10 years ago was hard because it's like, well, what am I going to drink? Tonic or seltzer. And now it's like you can go anywhere and you can have, a non-alcoholic wine. You can have an actual craft, non-alcoholic cocktail given to you versus, being like, oh, I'm just going to have a Sprite and, my night's kind of ruined.
Yeah, definitely when I first started bartending, like anything that was a mocktail was literal mimicry. It was a lot of folks not ready to have a conversation about why they weren't drinking because at that time, I feel like if someone asked you why you weren't drinking, like, you were under the lights. And especially now knowing as somebody who removed alcohol from my life very early on, like I didn't have the answers for myself, really, why I was not drinking, and I certainly wasn't ready to, like, give a quick, like, elevator pitch to somebody. But in those days, like, the mimicry of drinks is, like, just make me something that looks like what I usually drink because I don't wanna talk about it at all, and I'm really proud that we've been able to move away from that because now you can have, like, cocktails made with intention that don't involve any alcohol, and they're discoverable on a menu, and they have a name, and they're priced, and they've got fun ingredients and there's storytelling behind all of it. What's the approach to non-alcoholic drinks in your establishment?
So I work with some really, really cool creative people. When I first got hired, I didn't tell anyone that I didn't drink, because so I moved from Arizona out here to Dayton, and I kind of didn't want to set the tone with that, new manager in a cocktail bar, and like you said, it can kind of sometimes have a negative connotation to it. But as I started to get to know all of our bartenders and just like how they pull these insane drinks out of their minds and stuff, and talking to them about like, why I didn't drink or their view on non-alcoholics. And we all try really hard, very much like you said, like crafting drinks with intention, whether that has alcohol in it or not. And we want to create drinks that, have actual ingredients, that it's not 15 juices just all listed on the menu. It has like, you know, I want people to come in and be like, wow, this is like a very well crafted drink. And there's botanicals and infusions and, just all kinds of things that we can embrace and use in our non-alcoholics that don't have to make people feel like I'm drinking a sugary drink. And we try really hard to do that. And we have a rotational menu every month where one of our bartenders creates a cocktail menu purely created by them. And everyone usually has a non-alcoholic on there, and they're super cool. It's really neat just to see different people's iterations of NA options for sure.
How does the community embrace that?
I have not experienced any sort of backlash or anything, I would say, within the community here. I think it's pretty easy to, like you were saying, you know, even 10 years ago, it was all about mimicry and just make me something that makes me look like I'm drinking alcohol that I won't be ashamed for or anything. Now people come in and they actually want to order non-alcoholics and whether they drink or not. And I think that's really cool. being able to integrate those drinks in and it's doesn't have some weird stigma around it or like, oh wow, dude, you're you're ordering something that says 0% alcohol on it. It's like instead it's all about flavor and they're getting to experience, a really good drink in a really good environment. And that's really all that matters.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible. I mean, the number one buyers of non-alcoholic drinks are people that still drink. It's great that, like, it can kind of, like, go beyond that, of that sort of excitement of, like, I'm excited to be having this drink, and yeah, there just happens to be no alcohol in it, and especially for those folks that, like, still want to spend within an establishment. I go in and I don't buy any foolproof drinks, and, if there's great stuff on the menu, like, I'll often have, like, one of each when they're available, when it's, like, no proof beverages and stuff like that, and I think like so many establishments like don't realize like what they're truly missing out on when they don't have things available. Like it's not exciting for me to go up to a bar and like ask if they have not something without alcohol and they just say I can make you something because I know it's going to be sugar, juice and soda every single time because know, they didn't think enough to get excited themselves about a bottle as a bar person that they want to stock behind the bar and be able to create from. Like you only really need one bottle to start with your creativity, and then like you can really amplify a program from there.
Yeah, I fully agree. And very much of like how you're saying, like you want to go into an establishment and have a really nice experience. And just because you don't drink doesn't mean that, you need to be, it's like you're going to ruin that night for the bartender or the bar team. And I think I've been really lucky in experiencing that. I love going into bars and, going out with people and sitting in a cool bar. It's part of the experience for me. And, like you said, being able to get something where it's like, oh, here's your lime juice and soda, it kind of ruins it. And that's something I think that, the world we're kind of in now is people can go into bars and order drinks and the person next to them doesn't even know that it doesn't have alcohol in it or not.
Yeah, for sure. How are you telling your story now versus when you first stopped? Because I part of my story is like I thought I was going to have to leave the hospitality industry in the beginning, not because I was fearful of being around alcohol, but I, like you, didn't really like tell people that I didn't drink at first because I was scared that they wouldn't take me seriously. And it's like it's laughable now to think about that I would think like that. But yeah, I was like, I'm a beverage director in charge of these menus, and I don't drink. Like I thought it was going to be like the saying, like never trust a skinny chef sort of thing. I was people are going to laugh me out of here. And now the way that I talk about me and my story is drastically different in these almost 8 years. But how do you feel like you talk about yourself and your story year 4 versus year 1?
I definitely have heard that, oh, I don't trust a bartender that doesn't drink. And I think that's super discouraging for people who still want to be part of this industry. And it kind of like creates them as an outcast. And that's definitely how I saw myself. I was lucky, like I said, the environment I was in was super welcoming and it was, half the staff didn't drink in this industry. And I was kind of like, whoa, and they were, years into their sobriety. And I was like, this is actually a really cool environment. So I think I was really lucky to kind of start off as like, I can do this and, still be in this industry that I really like and kind of flourish in versus, trying to do it secretly or quietly and then trying to find a different job or go a different route. I was really nervous getting another job outside of the job that I had when I first got sober because I was, I was already accepted as someone who didn't drink and was able to, work in tandem with the bar program and still be creative with it. But I was really nervous of going into a new atmosphere. And that was actually more intimidating than stopping drinking. And I remember, I didn't tell anyone that I didn't drink. And I was super nervous about like reps coming in and, being the person that's like, oh no, I'm okay. Kind of the side eye, but that never actually really happened to me. Definitely noticed that like I'm able, kind of like you were saying, it's a part of my story versus kind of it being this like, little, little side paragraph about me. And I think a lot of people, or I think I was assuming that a lot of people would think I would like force my non-drinking on them. And that's definitely not true. And once I was able to kind of embrace that, like, oh no, this is like a part of my story and it's not, no one's thinking that I'm pushing my beliefs on them. I think I was definitely able to kind of step more into like that creative role and just kind of let it just be a part of me. It's not, stamped across my forehead either. I just kind of let it naturally kind of be a part of who I am.
It's awesome you had, similar folks, like, in your environment. What else did support look like for you? Like, did you have a sober support group or folks that, like, were a little more deeply impactful?
Yeah, definitely. I think my current boyfriend, he doesn't drink either, and that's I am very lucky to be dating someone who, you're able to not drink together, and that's been very easy. I think so. I quit cold turkey, and when I tell people that, I think a lot of people are kind of shocked, like you didn't go to a support group or anything. And I think my biggest support has kind of been myself. And I tell people like every story is different. Like sometimes quitting cold turkey might not be the way. It's just what worked for me. And I think being able to like rely on myself and kind of, when I say like, oh, I'm not going to drink anymore, and like kind of continue that promise that I made to myself, I've been like really surprised at like how much I've been able to rely on myself. And, once I kind of opened up to industry friends and everything, it was like nothing but support. And it was never like, finally she stopped drinking. It was like, no, this is like a cool choice. Like, we'll like continue to support you in this because it's making you happy. And I think that's been kind of a cool thing too, is seeing like how your friends react to you. And I've never had anyone negatively kind of react to me like that. So I think I'm lucky in that regard.
How has your self-talk changed?
It's definitely being able to wake up with a clear mind. I'm sure we've all had you wake up and you're groggy headed, and it's just, I always instantly started the next morning with like, oh my God, like, you're so dumb for, drinking this much, or so dumb for saying that, or there, are stretches of time that I don't even remember, regardless of if it's drink or trauma or whatever. I think I had super negative self-talk all of my 20s, and I'm just now kind of at the precipice of like full like positive self-talk, because that's like it's a hard habit to break, especially when you're kind of new in your sobriety. And I still consider myself very new in my sobriety, even though it's been 4 years. I still, there's things that I uncover like every day that I didn't really know about myself or expect from myself. But I think just constantly kind of having my own back, and even if I was talking negatively, it's like just, that's not true. Even if you're thinking it, it's just like that small little voice that's like, that's not true. And that's definitely like helped me develop more as a person. And yeah, I still, it's still something I struggle with every day, but the negative self-talk is getting quieter with each day.
Yeah, I can relate. I feel like early on, I continued the negative self-talk because even though I had made the decision to quit, I felt like I had to be kind of, I don't know, like held to the fire for my decisions before. Like I had to be like punished for however set amount of time until I felt myself worthy.
How did you, I very much resonate with that. How did you kind of find that, like, that you kind of stopped your negative self-talk, would you say?
Yeah, it came with the kind of like clarity that comes with sobriety. And it was just recognizing more space for the opportunity to kind of like catch those moments. Because before it was like almost like self-inflicted. And then when I realized it was kind of like coming from a deeper voice, that I wasn't the one kind of like projecting that on myself, I was like, well, where's this stuff coming from? Why am I making me feel this way?
Yeah.
And, it would be like moments of regret or, the similar feelings of like waking up hungover when you were feeling guilty even for something that you didn't do. Like those like little moments would be like peppered into my brain and I would just like think about it. And I was like, these are, it kind of felt the same way that that like a star is dead, but you still see the light. Like this, it just has to work
Yeah.
way through in some ways. And, I would hear those things inside my mind and I would just try to hang on to them as long as I could. Just be like, this is coming from an old, hurt, unhealthy person and it's reaching the ears of somebody who's in healing. And it was like that recognition that I needed for myself of just knowing that like the fact that you can recognize this as something bad means you've grown from it in some way. And it maybe not had been fully, I still feel like I'm healing. I'm not healed.
Yeah.
And that's like a big recognition of sobriety as well, is that when you say one day at a time, it doesn't just mean I'm not going to drink today. It means I'm also growing every single day in all these little different facets. And I know that that's a really long-winded way of answering your question, but it really just came down to just yet another moment of self-reflection in the same way that I self-reflected to make the decision to removing alcohol. That was one of the best lessons of sobriety, is just knowing when to turn around, shine the spotlight inward, and kind of like see or try to see where some of this stuff is coming from.
Yeah, I think self-reflection is like the biggest, it's kind of the coolest thing to obviously kind of within yourself, but it's interesting to see how people who I know who have stopped drinking and their self-reflection and, people who have been sober for longer than I have and just, whether it's 10 years, 20 plus, it's just like you'll never stop self-reflecting and growing. And like you said, you're not healed, you're always healing, and there will always be those parts that, might kind of echo throughout, but you kind of learn how to take that dialogue and have a dialogue back of, you were just doing the best you had with the tools that you had, whether it was right or wrong. Like for the most part, most people are just trying to survive the day. And if you can self-reflect on that, I think that's been really helpful for me, is just being like, just look at it. You don't have to be negative or, like you said, self-inflict, self-sabotage or anything. It's like, just look at kind of what's echoing in there and then see how you can grow from it.
Yeah, even recognition can be enough sometimes. Like
Yeah.
I very much fall victim of like I've got a fixer mentality. And that made sobriety difficult when I was like, why can't I just wrap this up? Like kind of coming to terms with the fact that like a lot of the things that I feel or sense like have to remain open really like came from that sort of recognition and that self-reflection. And I feel like that was difficult to get over.
Yeah, I'm someone who always needs resolution, and like you said, I even just being in like a manager role, like fixing things, like, A and B is the problem, like what's the C, what's the solution? And, kind of not having, the black and white resolution was and is definitely still something like I struggle with today. And learning how to kind of like you said, like recognizing it, but just like it's okay to leave things too. You don't have to try and heal every single thing that you might consider wrong with yourself, because that just doesn't make you a person.
What do you love about yourself?
I think I've struggled with self-love even as a kid, and it's something that I'm probably going to struggle with for a long time. But I think I love my resilience in terms of just like I'm able to really bounce back from things pretty quickly and I kind of always become a better person out of situations. And I think I've been able to kind of translate that into how I interact with people in life. And I always try to be, we try to be as genuine as we can and as honest as we can. And I definitely used to be a hardcore people pleaser. And I think now after drinking, I've become not an anti people pleaser, but being able to look at situations and being able to make decisions that are genuine and honest to myself. And I think being able to be honest with myself is something that I'm learning to love. I think that, yeah, just kind of being able to be a person and accept everything kind of where I'm at is something that I'm learning to love too, which is really kind of weird to say because, God, like 4 years ago, I would have definitely not been able to say that, or I would have been able to start crying and be like, I hate myself and all of that, which is definitely not true. But yeah,
That's amazing. Thank you, Julia.
yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, I think that that's something that everyone